Okay. We're moving from anticipating change to designing change. The two camps that are not always in love with each other. Let's be honest. Anticipating change, these are financiers. These are strategists. These are trend watchers. And they're not always the best relationship with the innovation R&D. Innovation R&D often thinks that they need to have full freedom, while the strategists want to nail it down to a bit of more controlled environment. So we want to make sure that transition needs to happen most smoothly. But first, let's check. How many of you actually talk to someone about your big idea? Okay, we're getting to a quarter. What do we need to make happen that another quarter talks to a stranger? This is so important. We're discussing in lunch how rarely we now step out of our comfort zone. So literally, you're standing in a restroom, right? You're standing in a loo, waiting for somebody in front of you. Ask them, what's their takeaway? What's the one thing they're changing? Believe me, you will have the best times. Just best times. Yeah, washing hands together, what would you do change differently? Now, what would you do differently? So make sure you keep translating this into specific actions, very pragmatic, specific actions. Things like how you run your agenda, how you organize your meetings. We now have companies that when you schedule a company meeting, it's already calculating the cost of that meeting based on the hourly salaries, so that you don't have crap meetings with 25 people there. It's very costly, very ineffective, and it kind of creates diluted accountability, and nobody knows why we're even there. So small things, big things, all of them make a difference, but let's look at where we are in the transition. So we already spoke about anticipating change. This is a skill we need to build the most. So in our research, when we study which of the areas companies are the strongest and the weakest in, the strongest point for 62% of companies is anticipating change. This is the muscle that has been the weakest so far. Then it's time for us to move to designing change, and that's what this session is about. We'll start with a beautiful panel, and then we'll have amazing keynotes from two legends, and then we will have a chance to digest that over coffee. And then tomorrow, the whole day is implementing change. The problem, of course, is usually implementing change is quite disconnected from the first two. So sometimes you have an amazing founder or a very, very strong CEO who is excellent at anticipating and then moves straight to implementation, completely bypassing designing. Have you met those? Right? I recently had an organization I worked with that they made a decision and passed it through the board without real thoughtful designing, only to learn that in half of their subsidiaries, this is actually illegal, not alone cannot be implemented. So this happens very often, that we skip a bit and we move from one to another too quickly. Designing change is crucial time for us to approach things differently. But the amazing thing that we're having is that we don't need to design everything in a very deliberate, pre-planned fashion. This is all about experimentalist approach, as we heard from Charles Kahn, or the emergent school of strategy, the beautiful keynote we have today with Peter Compo. But before we go there, we'll have a chance to hear from three practitioners. They're all working in this field from different angles. And I would like to welcome to the stage Patrick Gormley from Kyndryl, Simon Hill of Wazoku, and Kaihan Krippendorff from the Outthinker network. Welcome. So this is what I told them when we met for the debrief. I said panels are the worst part of every conference, right? It's like the boring part. We're all, like, you start scrolling on the phone and all of it. We will not do this. We need to figure out how to make it exciting. So if you start feeling like you are disconnecting, I need people to just put the hand up. I'm serious, okay? Let's disrupt. And then we'll make an actual example to translate it into something. We also have two microphones, one on that side, one on that side. We want to make sure that you can also interact, because I only have two questions and we have almost an hour. So let's make it your panel, and let's not have a boring thing after lunch that will just put us to sleep. Good? Okay. Okay, guys. So you know the deal. I have only 2 questions. My first question is very simple. Managing in a low volatility environment, managing in high volatility environment, what's the difference for you? Patrick, we'll start with you and then see who disagrees first. We already disagreed, so.
Yeah, plenty of disagreement. I'm okay with that. I think I'm actually one of those people who's been around long enough when we saw the graphs this morning and the charts that were in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
And now I'm in 2025. And I have to say, 2025, 4 months already feels like a year in the area I'm dealing in, which is predominantly AI, which is, forefront of many people's mindsets at the moment. And in this year, we've seen things like, we're already starting to get used to new models being updated nearly every week and a new release. But this year, we've seen like an explosion. So I would think many people in September, October last year, or even before Christmas, had never even heard of agentic AI. And now everyone wants to talk, what does agentic AI? Nobody had heard of DeepSeek AI models until January, and it's like, that was only January, that was only a few months ago. And then we went from this agent stuff, that we can have all these agents that will do all these tasks. And in January, the research papers were saying you can orchestrate 6 of these agents. And that was leading edge research. Then there was something from one of the Gen AI companies, Anthropic, that brought out a protocol, a bit like an API, that can make these things coordinate faster. And then we went to 24. And then 2 weeks ago, Google released something called agent to agent. And we almost get to infinity of being able to coordinate these. So it's actually, it's redefining as well when you mean this accelerated environment is. You're almost redefining it as we go along as well. Now, what I find talking to and it's not just technology, we've got a lot of geopolitics at place. And if you look at it now, you can see our systems are breaking down. Since Independence Day, that wasn't my term. Since the 2nd of April,
tariffs, translation, tariffs. The Independence Day is the day the tariffs were announced.
Since then, we now have chief executives, chief finance officers, talking about their companies and the earnings, and actually not being able to give forecasts, not even being able to give advice to shareholders. Now, that never happened before. It never even happened under COVID. So we're entering new phases now, and I think you were talking about it this morning, trying to plan annually in budgets and cycles. At best, you're going to get a best view now in a quarter, and particularly this year when I've looked, I can seriously, and I talk to a lot of people in the industry, lots of clients, it's like, oh my God, it does feel like we've done 2025 already. We've done a year in a third of the year. So it's blistering. So the old systems are not working. Agility, planning for agility is key. A lot of people are working out it's not just the processes, it's the culture of the company is not fit for purpose now because of, we were all trained differently. We were trained, well, not all of us, and a lot more younger people in here than me, but certainly in my lifetime, you went and got qualified, you went into a job and you stayed there 40 years, you got the gold watch, you left and you retired. And it was quite sustainable. Now people, we're getting people coming into the market who are going to have 7 careers in their lifetimes. And that's a different culture. So we've got all this going on at the top. And actually, as we're starting to get Gen Z type people into the business, they're disrupting. Yeah. They want different things. They have different values, different expectations. So actually, there's just nothing that is stable anymore. So it just, and it is exhausting as well. That's the other thing. I think many people will feel this is just exhausting at the moment. So we don't know what the new rules are yet. That's the trouble. And whatever we invent today, I can tell you by the end of the year, it'll be obsolete and we'll be thinking again.
Well, Patrick just mentioned a few, right? AI, geopolitics and trade wars, new generation. Kaihan, on the call when we talked about it, your view was that this is not that new, that we've lived through this again and again. Tell us.
I think games change. Every game has different, like in chess, you've got an opening, you've got a middle, and you've got an end game, and the way you play those games is different. We've experienced moments of change, the installation of running water changed things, the microwave changed things. And so I don't think that this is unprecedented. Of course, every technology is different, but the strategic approach that you take at the end game is very logical. If I do this, and then we set a plan, and then you implement it. At the beginning of a game, there's a different strategic framework, which actually is the basis of lean and agile. Steve Blank said that agile came from fighter pilots. And I think that's what we have to shift to. John Boyd created this framework called OODA, Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And the idea is that if you can observe the environment, orient yourself to what's happening, make a decision, take action on the decision, and this is the learning cycle of to observe then what is the result of your action, and then adapt. If you can do that quickly, then we can play the opening game. And a critical step, and I think that's where we are at the beginning stages right now of trying to put together, is this observe to orient. And he'd do this little exercise that maybe we could do over here, would be, I'll ask you to imagine 3 different scenes, and I'll take an element out of each scene, and I'm going to ask you to put them together. And when you see what the next scene is, just call it out. Don't raise your hand or wait for a microphone. Just speak it out in whatever language comes to you first. Let's picture a ski scene. So there's a family, and they are on the slopes, and they're working their way down, mother and father and kids. Now it's summertime. They're at the park. And they're on their bicycles, and they're biking around the park, and you can picture the flowers and the rest. Now they go home, and the little daughter and son are playing with some toys, and there's a little toy tank in the image. So you've got to imagine these 3 different things, right? The analogy here, of course, is agentic AI, the transformation of physical customers to digital customers, and the ability to target smaller pockets of usage. 3 different things, that we think of 3 different things. Now, I want you to take 3 elements out of these 3 different scenes and put them in together in your head, and then tell me what you see next. I'd like you to take the skis from the ski scene, take the handlebars off of the bicycle, take the treads off the toy tank, and you put them together, and what do we have? Snowmobile. Who raised his hand and said snowmobile? Great. What's your name? Joanne? Yes. Great. So Joanne sees the snowmobile. And she's off on the snowmobile, riding off into the sunset, while we're here thinking and talking about these 3 different things. And so that, I think, is like the first step. And then the next step is making a decision, taking action, and learning from that decision. So I think it's an exciting time. I think it is a precedented but unusual time, and that there is an interesting framework, there are interesting approaches that we can use to win the opening.
This leads us to Simon. Low volatility, high volatility. How do you, in your own role as a CEO, manage that? And how do you see that happening for other industries?
Yeah, so first of all, I was sitting here thinking and deliberating on A, my role as a CEO, and B, my role as a sort of advisor and working inside large organizations. And I feel like the job of people that work right on the jagged edge of net new things is to do all the things we've been talking about this morning, really. Like we overstate the impact they'll have in the short term because we're so bought into the things that are happening, and we can see the future, right? You can understand what's happening. On the other side, there are and you're trying to adapt for those all of the time, right? On the other side, especially in large organizations, there's a big planted foot, there's a big norm, right? And a lot of people, we may say that everyone's talking about agentics. I would proffer that very few people are talking about agentics outside of the bubble that we live in, right? They haven't even heard of it. They have no clue. Can we swear on this stage? We have no clue what we're talking about. Even before agentics and everything else, right? Like there's a lot of work to be done. And you might go, oh, but that's workers here that are sort of, they're in more traditional businesses. It is not, it is CEOs. It is leaders of teams that don't understand the things that are coming through. And so part of my job is to help be a teacher, right? And to make sure we're really manifesting what is really complicated. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think I'm good at it, but I sit at the back of the room and think, fuck, maybe I don't understand this properly, because it's hard, right? And stuff is new, and it's coming at you from 1,000 different angles, but there's always a planted foot. I think the challenge right now, and we've got Alex on later, is you're seeing more business model disruption perhaps than we have, and that's the hardest form, right? And I resonate very strongly with the stat you showed earlier that, I think it was a red color of things, that technology businesses are being disrupted, or have to reinvent on a 12-month cycle, and maybe it's less, right? The concept of vibe coding, which I don't know if anyone's, some people be familiar with it, some people not. As a thing, it's like, was that a groan?
Yes. There's
sorry.
a boo in the audience. We heard an actual boo right there.
What did I do? Shit.
That's the concept itself.
That's a success. I'm going to count my booze. I'm going to count my booze for the next 45 minutes. I have that reaction as well, though, actually. But there are things that are happening. There are people in this room I've spoken to here that may or may not regard themselves as doing that, but they're creating products and services and disrupting businesses in a way that their own businesses cannot yet appreciate or understand. That consultancies are going to face huge challenges around, right? So I'm hugely optimistic about what's coming. I'm constantly having to reinvent my own business without killing the bloody thing, right? Because I think there was another stat earlier of 10 new things a year or whatever it is. I think it's possibly even more than that, right?
It's 10 per employee.
10 per employee.
In general, in a typical company, we're at 50 plus per year.
I think it might be, yeah, exactly. But I think it may even be
50 plus
more.
per year for a typical employee, and being about 10, because not every initiative covers every function. But the mass amount of plan change, this is plan change. This is before Independence Day announcement. This is things we already had in the works. That is just a volume we haven't seen for a very, very long time.
Yeah, but I think therefore being really certain about what that planted foot is, the thing that the analogy comes from, from basketball and other sports, right? Where in order to pivot, in order to do the work we're doing from an innovation perspective, right, there has to be something solid underneath us as we go. In business model, that planted foot gets disrupted, right? So suddenly you're pivoting around the thing that wasn't solid. In the car example from earlier, you could argue that everything was predicated on high-tech combustion level engineering and everything else, and suddenly the electric car changes the planted foot. The business model, the thing that differentiated you, that you could innovate around, is gone. And gone very quickly, and gone to a fact, and then there's a whole bunch of other politics that wrap around it, but that was the fundamental that came. Now there's a whole bunch of opportunity that sits the other side of that, right? But I think there's a real lack of understanding around it. There's some stat I saw recently that said, and I think it should be higher, that 84% random number of CEOs recognize the importance of AI to their organizations, 23% understand it, right? So and whatever those numbers are, there's a disparity there that is going to make it very, very difficult. If you don't understand what's happening at the jagged edge, you can't really bring that into your core organization. And I think if you can't get those two things really close together, you've got a real problem.
Patrick has a reaction there, but before that, the concept of a planted foot. What is your stability? What is the source of your stability in your business model and your team? Just ask yourself that question in the next 15 minutes. Try to write it down, because in Reinvention, we are working with two opposing forces. One is managing change, and we are all obsessed over that. What are we changing? Technologically, revenue-wise, the revenue capture, pricing, product, on and on and on. But managing change makes no difference without managing continuity. If you're not protecting something that is continuously that is stable, that is core, that is your planted foot, you cannot, it spins out of control. So yes, you need to manage change, everything we're planning to change, but also what needs to remain continuously undisrupted? What needs to be core? What is our protected area that we will never compromise on? And it's a very interesting strategic challenge. So if you can start giving yourself that question, what's my planted foot? What am I not ever giving up, or at least ever? In the next few years, I'm not giving up in my company, in my team, in my product. That becomes a core. But Patrick, you had a reaction to that.
I think there's a couple of things. I did like what Simon said about sitting at the back of the room and thinking, I thought I knew this. I didn't see the stuff and think I don't. And actually, I actually got comfortable with this a few years ago. I think it was Tom Peters that said, in the current world, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. And actually, I'm sort of, that's been a mantra, because most of the stuff I don't understand these days, or I work hard to try, I work increasingly harder to do so. And even the, so you mentioned vibe coding. Do we get another boo for the word? But actually, what that really is...
Give us the definition. I don't know what that is.
What it really is, at its heart is, we know, a few years ago, if you wanted to build a website, you had to have some coding skill. You'd be able to code in Java, Python, whatever. And actually now, since generative AI, you can now talk to the AI, and it will start to build a website for you. So, whilst it's got a bit of a TikTok image about it, it actually shows how we're moving forward, how we're actually democratizing technology. Now, that starts to become important in the world because technology will be a deliverer of economic growth. And we know that. We've seen all the geopolitics now of all the governments get involved with AI, and you saw the Paris Summit and some behaviours around regulation. But looking further along, there's still a third of the global population that's not connected yet. So that's like 2.5 billion people who are yet to come into the global economy. And they're going to come into the global economy very differently than we did. I mean, I was with Rita this morning when she talked about the dial-up internet. I know some of you may not even experience that. But they're not going to come to the internet. They're not going to come to tech.
Disruption, it's okay. Say hi, whoever.
That was the dial-up internet.
Yeah, the dial-up internet. I've lived through it. I sometimes play the sound to my kids of that, and they're like, "What is that, Dad?" I said, "That's how you got onto the internet. You don't know you're born." So so what you've got now 2.5 billion people who can now engage in the global economy. And much easier. They're not even going to engage now. Their interface is not even going to be a keyboard. It's going to be language in their own language, and the technology will convert it. So you don't even need to be literate. Now, when you think about it, that actually is very exciting. We're going to get greater prosperity in areas that are currently marginalised from that. We've got new entrepreneurs, different entrepreneurs. We're going to get more diversity, and they're going to create great things. So whilst we do the TikTok vibe coding today, it's actually going to the next world economy.
And I know you've been very proactive working with groups, regions, especially in the young population that is not usually in the big city where there's access to opportunity that is immediate. And the project you're doing in the UK would be an example of that. So why are you engaged with youth and go in a different route?
I think
Say more about the project, of course.
Interestingly, this sounds like I'm a Rita McGrath fanboy, really, but about 11, 12 years ago, I went to a conference in Radio City Hall in New York, and Rita was a presenter there. And actually, she said something quite profound, I actually thought. And quite
She always does.
And actually, the one word she said, the future's not ownership of talent, the future is access to talent. And after that, ever since that, I've always thought, particularly in a consulting organisation, that consulting's gone through massive change and will go through massive change even further, and there's distress in the market for sure. But it's the actual, you're not going to own all the talent you need, but you have to get access, means a different mindset. So you have to do things like create ecosystems with partners. You have to start to think about, can I create a crowdsourcing platform so I can get the best ideas from anywhere? And actually, in a connected world, anywhere can really be anywhere. And then, of course, we do have a skills gap in the UK, like most Western world, and it's with demographics, it's going to get worse. We've got to have aging population. We've not got the birth rates to sustain it in the long term. So we've got a strategic issue in the Western world in demographics. So you have to work harder now to reach talent. And what that means is you've got to work harder, but you're going to give opportunity to people who would not previously have opportunity. So, to join a consulting organisation, I couldn't join a consulting organisation when I was young because I didn't go to college. I didn't go to higher education. I was a bit of a sob story, guys, tissues out, but I was the eldest of of 4 kids with a single parent mother. And I lived on a council estate in northwest England, and there was no money for me to go to higher education. In the mid-30s, I went back and did an MBA, and I ended up in consulting. But I would not have got the opportunity. And actually, I do like the likes of Ewan Blair, who's been a real advocate for growing apprenticeship schemes in the UK, which is really, the foundation is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So when you realise that, you've just got to work hard, you've got to reach the groups. So we went to Liverpool. We could have expanded in London. We went to Liverpool. Why did we go to Liverpool? It's actually talent rich, but the opportunities have not been given yet. And actually, it's on the agenda of the devolved governments now, if you like, the regional mayors. It's top of their agenda. It's about giving opportunity to people and helping them with sustainable, high-value jobs that they otherwise wouldn't have got. So I think it's whilst it feels good and it's part of corporate responsibility, it is a way of getting talent that it is just essential for our future.
Kaihan, let me piggyback on that. You run an amazing strategist network.
Kyndryl's been a member.
Yes, you have chief strategy officers from very different industries. Now, how they are managing this high disruption world, and where are you seeing cases popping up, whether it's talent management, technology management, anything, that for you
that's why
like hope?
I think that what Rita shared just now and what you shared at the opening is so important, because I think that Joanne Garbin, who's going to be with us, I think later, she spoke to our group, and one thing she shared was that in Microsoft's experience, that 90% of the value of an innovation comes from the business model and 10% from the technology. The technology commoditizes quickly, people copy quickly, and yet 90% of our investment in innovation goes to the technology.
Yes.
Right? And so the sustainable part is the people. And these technologies, and I would bundle AI along with blockchain, with digitization, with advances in API, and this flow of data that allows us to, what it's doing is it's lowering transaction costs, right? So it used to cost more, and the whole reason you have a firm, the theory of a firm, is because it's cheaper to give someone a full-time job than to give them a project and let them work and let them go, right? And that's dismantling. And so this permissionless organization, which Rita is laying out the contours for, creates this flexible organization that allows us to tap this talent, allows them to ramp them up, allows them to engage them, and allows us to diversify the jobs. I mean, if we were selling, if we're selling cars right now, we were back in the Model T Ford, right?
Yes.
Your job is a black Model T Ford. You want to work on Thursdays and not on Tuesdays? We don't sell that. You know, you are a young career person, you want to work a lot, you have young kids, you don't want to work as much, we don't sell those, right? So we don't diversify. So I think that if we tie those things together, what's going to create the advantage is the business model. The flexibility to have multiple business models and adapt your business model is a result of being able to have flexibility in people. Flexibility in technology and infrastructure, I think, is already being solved, this flexibility in people. And an answer to that are these alternative non-hierarchical business models. So I think that that's where our members often, we talk, like we were talking about, start talking about AI, and then where we land is people, organizational structures, incentives, recruitment. Yeah.
And I think that's true for all of us. We pay so much attention to technology. Who is in charge of business model in your company? Which department? There's one person who raised hand. I am alone in charge of business model. CEO. Karina is putting her hand up. CEO. That's the issue, that business model being 90% or whatever of success, a little bit less, but 60% you mentioned?
I said 90.
Yeah.
I don't have the data to support that.
It's a huge percentage of success. It's definitely not technology, it's the business model. In a typical company, there is no function that takes care of business model renewal on a continuous basis. That's when I was working in mining and everyone asked me, I was a fractional executive, so everyone asked me, what do you do? And I'm like, I have no title. That's how Chief Reinvention Officer was born, because you need a combination of strategy, innovation, and change for a business model management. We have to start paying attention to who is tending to the business model, because it's no longer once every 10-year thing you ship out. It's a daily thing. Let me check very quickly, and then I'll ask Simon. Any hands up? We're bored. We are. We're fully present. Okay, we have mics on both sides. We have IT company that is entering consulting and a former paramedic who is now doing AI. We have Simon, who is just really exploring combinations of AI side of innovation versus human side of innovation. I want to hear about that next. And we have Kaihan, who brings together a community of strategists. This is the time to ask questions, and we have tons of questions, so 4 questions. Let's take questions first, and then I come back to you. Can somebody bring us mic on this side and on this side? We have 4 questions, and then we will dive in. So we have IT plus consulting, we have an innovation crowd sourcing, and we have strategy present on stage. And somebody will bring us a mic in a second. I see one here. So let's start with a hand up on this side, and if somebody can bring one here, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Ian Wright, Disruptive Innovators Network. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, said something really interesting at Davos earlier on in the year, that the current group of leaders are going to be the last leaders who will only be managing a human workforce. Going forward, you're going to be managing 2 different sorts. Whether you agree with that hype or not, I just wondered what the panel's view was. What are the new skills that executives are going to have to acquire to achieve that?
Simon, I actually will ask you about the MIT project right here, because your exploration, humans versus AI, and who are we managing, is exactly that.
Yeah, so talking about these words that get thrown around like agentic or whatever, I did this at dinner last night, and this was a speaker's dinner with 30 or so people that are right on the jagged edge of this stuff, and I threw around the idea of a synthetic crowd, and several people looked at me as if I was talking another language, which I didn't think I was doing. So I'm as guilty as the next person at not good self-reflection on this. But so I'm a part of a network of people that are looking at the evolution of human crowds and synthetic crowds and how these two can interplay and work together. There are, I'm sure around the world, a number of people. I'm doing a lot of it in the US for a variety of network-based reasons. That's just where I found the people. I'm sure there's lots happening elsewhere as well. And I'm at MIT next week for a conference with corporates and higher education research centers and et cetera, really digging into this, right? No self-promotion, just to explain my context a little bit, a part of the business I have has just under 1 million people who are entrepreneurs, inventors, researchers, super smart, often slightly unusual people who do innovation, discovery, research, and invention on behalf of companies, public, private, humanitarian type organizations. And they do it completely on their own dime, on their own time as well. So like 1 million people who are, I'm going to use this word vibe coding, but they're vibe innovating, they're doing work off of things, yes, with the promise of delivering something. And so you've got these humans, right? These incredible people who sometimes work together, sometimes work independently. Their houses are like sci-fi centers of just, labs and all kinds of crazy stuff. I tell many of them when I speak to them, I'd never go to their house for dinner because they often tell me that they've used their microwave for this and their blender for this and God knows what else, creating all kinds of crazy things with all these different computer systems running at God knows what. You probably don't want to be on the grid next door to them either. But they're incredible people. And now you've got this world of AI coming up alongside them, right? And what can that do? And then you've got AIs working with AIs alongside them. I heard last week we've now got therapeutic AIs giving therapy to the AIs who are getting depressed because the state of the world is so depressing for an AI as well. So there's complexity in all of this, but I'm sure they'll find their happiness somewhere. But what we empirically know at the moment, and this is getting more true, not less true as AI evolves, is the collection of a human crowd empowered by an AI capability, a synthetic crowd, outperforms every other alternative therein by a significant factor. And those are non-specialists, they're generalists, right? In a myriad of different forms. And so I'm hugely optimistic about what the future looks like on that basis if we can start to embrace the open models and the open ways of working which are extraordinarily challenging for businesses to do. We're not set up in that way. We're not as humans educated in that way. We're not defined in that way. But that's what leaders are going to have to deal with, right? We're going to have to think about how do we incentivize differently? How do we think about what it means to be an expert and a professional in a variety of different ways? And understand that many of the smart people that are going to do work for us maybe won't work for us, right, in the future as well. And that doesn't mean higher risk. It doesn't mean higher complexity. In many ways, it actually means the entire opposite of that. But yeah, we'll see. So I'm interested what comes next. So there are some incredible experiments going on the synthetic side. I'm super excited about that blend, right? I'm very optimistic for the human conditions future. And I think that the technology alongside us is just going to accelerate that for us.
Love that. Anyone wants to pick up on that?
I mean, because you mentioned MIT, and there was a Tom Malone at the MIT Media Lab. He was writing about something like this like 5 years ago, right? He did this great experiment. He said humans, machines working together, and the test. And this isn't necessarily the right test for effectiveness, but how good are you at predicting something? Will the stock market go up? Will the weather? So then they would find these. He find these people who are just good at predicting. They might be a husband and wife team in Australia who are farmers, but somehow they're good at predicting presidential elections.
Yes.
We don't know why, right? And collect these super predictors. And then we work them together with machines, right? Now, how do they work together with machines? He says, and there are, I think, other ways, but there's different ways. We think there's hierarchy and non-hierarchy, but there's not. There's hierarchy, there are ecosystems, there are communities, there are democracies, there are marketplaces. And so he did an experiment. He found the best combination was humans and machines interacting through a marketplace, buying and selling predictable whatever units of whether something will happen. So I think that's another thing that's exciting for leaders to think about as we think about what this other organizational structures would be, that we already exist in our organizations. We don't see it, but we have a marketplace. If you're a bad manager and you're trying to get someone to come and work with you, there's a marketplace at work there, right? There's a democracy at the top of your organization where your investors, which is why we have Patagonia saying, I want this investor voting and not that investor, right? There's a democracy there, and there's certainly ecosystems and things. So that's, I think, an exciting new skill that I think leaders have always had available to them, but now they become consciously available to them, is what are the materials by which they can design the organizational structures.
Absolutely. Let me do a quick pulse check. How many of you use AI every day consciously? I mean, you use AI unconsciously, just watching Netflix anyway. Okay, good, almost all. How many of you train your AI using your own data? Train your AI using your own data. This is one of the biggest leaps that we're not seeing. AI as an assistant is the first step. However, the most incredible thing that is happening is that we as humans are not owning our own data. What is your own data? What you eat every day, for example. Imagine if you had one place that never forgets what you have eaten your entire life and tracks every nutrient that ever entered your body. You owning that data is as quickly as snapping a picture of your food every day. You don't even need to give AI prompts anymore. Owning your own data on your patterns, on your spending habits, on your ideas, on people you met at this summit, just recording a note, I just met such and such, AI will start prompting you to connect with those people or rethink that idea and so on. The issue is we give away our data to everyone. Have you ever read every terms and condition thing you signed on the phone, on Facebook, or whatever? No. You give away your data every day to anyone but to yourself. But for some reason, we're very afraid to give that to AI when you are the only consumer of that data. So taking an ownership of data and moving from using AI as a basic assistant to using your own data to train the AI becomes the next logical step in getting into that win-win, not to be a victim of a system. But we have a question right here.
Is this mic on?
Yes.
It's on.
Okay. My name's Catherine. Thank you all for being here. I teach Agile product development at VCU and other colleges, and we introduce AI tools to build a mobile app on day 2. So I'm really familiar with a lot of stuff, and I go to conferences. Last week I went to a conference where a brilliant woman, Mary Thorne, presented the enterprise rollout of AI. And she said two things that were surprising to me. One was that they had to introduce a white glove treatment for people learning AI in the organization, because they saw the block in ChatGPT and they froze. So it's expensive. When I think about innovation, I don't focus on the laggards. But this is all new to me. You actually have to focus on the laggards to make any kind of enterprise rollout, which is new. And the other thing she said was we had to move from roles-based to skills-based for starting up new projects. So what do you think about those questions?
Actually, it goes to the model you showed earlier, Nadya, about design for change, because it is change. It's just technology, and as you've said earlier, this is another technology. We've had electricity, we've had the internet, and there's some familiarities in the cycles and the behaviours and how things are adopted. But I think the truth is everyone thinks this is easy to adopt, and it isn't. It might be for some people. And actually, some people are natural adopters. If you remember that, I don't remember the thing crossing the chasm.
The law of infusion.
These innovators, fast movers, late majority, early majority, etc. So we've got people who are naturally aligned here. A lot of corporations we get consulted on we've already bought these tools, we've bought this technology, we're not getting any value, we're not seeing return on investment. And to be honest, that's not a new phenomena. That's as long as I've been in consulting 30-odd years now. And that's been the same with all technologies, is deploying a technology does not produce value. It goes back to the design for change. And if we're not using, within that design for change, techniques like usability, human-centered design, if we're not using that, things will not get adopted. And that's an issue. And then you've got to change the humans. You've got to help the humans change. And what we're starting to see now is there's a couple of things. So the IBM's Institute for Business Value a few months ago did a survey, and actually they said 35% of the total workplace population, total workforce today, will need retraining. Mm-hmm. And that's coming out already. And that's actually 1 billion people, actually. So this is a big issue. And even things like, how do you do prompt engineering? Now, a lot of people who are interested, if you're a natural innovator, an early adopter, you've probably played about with this. You've probably looked on YouTube, or you've probably curate content that tells you and gives you updates. But it's not natural. But all employees are struggling with this at the moment, even the basic models. What's the prompt I need for this? And then they get frustrated. And actually, what it needs, you need them employees who are curious, because you've got to play about with it to a certain, unless the corporate provides prompt engineering support, which I think which you would describe as the white glove thing. And we are. This is even though it's a technology, it's got fabulous potential. You can't forget the basics. Mm-hmm. Design and change is how you really get adoption, and it's through adoption and usage that's where the value is. And that's not changed.
Love that.
I think there's a little bit of this that we have to be a bit fair and honest about, though, if I'm going to play devil's advocate on this, sorry to jump in, which is a little bit analogous to this buzzword of innovation or transformation or anything else. It's like, we must teach innovation, we must teach AI, we must, what is it? Like, what do we actually mean in the application of your job? Your career, your life, where you are in the context of your job, your career, what you're trying to do personally, whether it makes any difference or not. You know, we had Charles on here talking about the CEO of Patagonia not having a cell phone, not having a computer. I think AI is irresonant. It resonates in the business, but it doesn't resonate from a leader down. For lots of people, we have to be very careful of this buzzword being actually meaningless, right? I think, and the application of value, which is innovation's biggest curse, right? It's like, we do innovation, okay, show me the value. Right, we do AI, show me the value. And I think the big challenge at the moment, I'm sure there'll be examples in this room where everyone goes, well, we're creating value with AI. Cool, is it systemic and is it really embraced at the business level? Because the existential crisis that looms in front of all of us is that as we've entered this period of high volatility, we haven't created excess value. We haven't created extra productivity. We haven't really done the thing that innovation promised to do. which is to accelerate. It's changed things. It's made us less secure and less certain. It's made some things easier and it made a lot of things a lot fucking harder. But where's the extra value? And a lot of that is in demystifying and getting our arms around less generic words and more specific value-based training in do this. As you said earlier, Netflix is AI. Your mobile phone is enabled by AI. There's lots of things. Your car does all these things with AI. I bought this drone over the weekend that was a couple of £100 that's got connected to 50 satellites at any second in time with AI, and it'll follow you. I give it a face, and it just follows you. It's like, I'm not thinking about AI. I'm thinking about, in that case, taking some cool videos and playing with my kids. But like, it's not AI, but it is, right? And so we've got to try and bring the real world application in and then recognize that some people are just shit scared by this, right? And that's going to be really important. And it's not about training in the prompts or the AI or anything else. It's about being superhuman with what it is, because what most people will hear, like they did with transformation or something else, which is I'm going to lose my job. And I don't have another job. This is my job, right? I'm not going to retrain as a prompt engineer, and I want to get booed for vibe coding or whatever. It's like, I don't even know what it is. So
there's some emotion. Well, let me give you an illustration of the value question. So many years ago, I was walking through the halls of the company, Mining Metals, 100,000 employees, and we're in the middle of ERP installation. All of you have been part of ERP horror story, right?
Nobody booed that.
I know. The most horrible thing I've ever seen. So I'm walking in the hall, and I hear loud shouting in the conference center. And I peek in, and I see the regional CFO, so CFO of a massive region, on one side of a table, and I swear if there is no table between, they would hit each other by then. And then there's a head of ERP team, the installation team, on another side of the table, and they're shouting, they're already up. And I ask, what's up? Why are you screaming? And the regional CFO says, I have this form I have to submit to headquarters. Every single quarter, 2,000 people through the company manually calculate this stupid form in Excel spreadsheet. It's very costly, it causes a lot of hours, and on and on and on. The ERP team refuses to automate this thing. I asked the ERP team lead, why not? It's out of scope, it's too expensive, they just added it on, this will delay the rollout, la 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 la. I asked back and forth, they cannot find any kind of compromise, so I said, okay, what's the form, what's the value of the form? Who is the internal customer of the form? What's the value? I asked around, they said, well, it's headquarters, so they ask, we send. Have you asked them what's the value? Can we deliver the same value without 2,000 people and without ERP? No. Speakerphone CFO of the group. Hey, what are you using this form for? Attention. We stopped using it 2 years ago. I guarantee today you have that story in your company. Who is the customer? What's the value? Should be the mantra, whether you're talking about internal or external customer. It matters not. If we don't look at everything at that lens, who is the customer of that glass on stage and what's the value? And if there is no value, don't put it on stage. It's very simple. But that again, who is the owner of that question in the company? And outside of CEO, unfortunately, currently, it's a rare that we see a company where there is a strong ownership. We have one more question right here, gentlemen in the front row, and then we'll come back here. We need a mic. If somebody can pass it on.
He's got a loud voice as well, I know.
I will repeat, but it's coming. We also have translation, so it's important that we capture it.
Hi, hello. Hi, my name's Stuart Maister. I think my question flows from some of the conversation. I was thinking about the title of the session, actually.
Yes. Well, slowly warming up to that.
And there's an assumption central to this. This is a reinvention within one organization.
Yes.
But I was thinking also of the murmurations we saw earlier today.
Yes.
And it seems to me that as any organization is increasingly part of its own ecosystem. It has its own ecosystem of partner suppliers. It's part of the ecosystem of its customers. And I'm just wondering how that changes this reinvention thinking, that you don't necessarily just reinvent your organization. It has to be a collaborative reinvention of the murmuration.
Yes.
Whatever murmuration you choose to frame that reinvention around. I'd be interested, you mentioned ecosystems earlier in passing. I'd love to hear the thinking around this
collaborative ecosystem thinking of reinvention rather than how do we change, how does the CEO change our model, for us?
Absolutely, and that immediately takes us to the question, do we do it in-house? Do we outsource? Do we do hybrid ecosystems? Go, Kaihan.
So, we're going to get this gift of getting to hear from Peter Compo after this, and we got to spend some time with him yesterday. We had about 35 of our strategy officers, and we did touch on ecosystems. And I just have like two thoughts from that, and just in general, is we need to, especially with big changes, understand how the ecosystem changes. And it's usually and this also answers the question of what people have to learn. So let's look at adoption of new technology. I think we're kind of at phase one, where the new technology does some things better than other things, phase one. Microwave, I can warm a small meal faster. Well, secondary implications. Now, we're not there yet. Secondary implications is, a small meal I can cook faster, but a meal for 6 is still gonna take me a long time. Right? And what does that result in? It starts resulting in an ecosystem change. People less often having family meals together, but instead having individual meals. Women, at the time, it's mostly women doing the work and spending 40 hours working, 15 hours working. What does that result in? In a whole plethora of ecosystem components in terms of education. My mother's from Bangladesh. She was going to be married off, and she escaped and came to the United States. But there had to be a whole ecosystem change. If we could look at space as well, I think that we don't talk enough about space. I think maybe like AI is kind of like one marketplace. Space is the next marketplace. What do we need to create? We talked about the cars. What do we need? You need infrastructure. We need roads. We need rules. Who owns the data? We need interoperability. We need providers that can plug into different things. And so thinking about those ecosystems, but I think if you do look at evolutions of other marketplaces like the automobile and like the internet, e-commerce, you'll see the components of what has to be in the ecosystem, and we need to start influencing. Then we can start getting to that third phase. Fourth phase, by the way, is that we forget that the technology ever existed.
Yeah, beautiful. Simon.
Yeah, I think I would layer onto that. So one of the relatively large pieces of work that I've got going on as a sort of side of desk project at the moment is to build a crowd of crowds, right? So I have this crowd of about 1 million people around the world, but there are local ecosystems. So let's take the City of London that I'm currently working on this with the Mayor of London on. And that city comprises an ecosystem of actors, the regulator, the government, the large banks, the other large players, the startups, the universities, the students that go to those universities, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the way that, that the local economy is trying to drive innovation, growth and prosperity, let's use that word rather than shitty words like AI and innovation and other things. So reinvention towards growth and prosperity, right, is where we're trying to get to. Is local money deployed into local businesses to drive local growth and prosperity with a national lens, with a global lens tied to it, right? And so if you can pull together the shared problem statements, and one of the challenges of thinking about it in such microscopic ways as functions or businesses or whatever is there's a lot of hygiene-related transformation and reinvention that needs to happen. And if everyone's spending the same dollar to drive the same inadequate outcomes, to do the same inadequate learning, then we're not really being very efficient, right? And so if we can figure out where the planted foot is and where our point of true differentiation is, and that's the bit you've got to carve out, right? Everything else is hybrid, in my opinion, in terms of approach, and should be coming together to pool our resources, pool our intellect, and use the best of the local ecosystem, the best of the global ecosystem to figure it out, right? And there's a huge amount of politics and complexity and all of that, but at the heart of it, it's like humanly simple. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of a Dublin crowd, of an Ireland crowd, feeding into a European crowd, feeding into the best of the rest of the world crowd is, for me, is the direction of travel. And it plays to the complexity of nationalism, which is important, right? There's work to be done there, and globalism, right? And how do we get the best of the best working out? Because quite a lot of the stuff we're wrestling with has been solved somewhere else in some slightly adjacent area. And that's what we don't often see. Not somewhere else like, the Amazon or somewhere else, like literally the building next door in a different team. But we're not talking, we're not collaborating, we're not opening up. even that far to try and figure these things out.
I'll illustrate with that. So the Global Alliance of Reinvention Professionals has this tradition of having Thursdays where anyone can bring a problem. And at the beginning, we couldn't get the takers. Because in a consulting world, you keep your things close. You kind of, I'm not going to show you my things. We started showing all pricing around the world. Because nobody knows what's the pricing in consulting. And everyone pretends that we just somehow figured it out. Just sharing basic things. What are the pricing models? How much do we all charge? What would you pitch to this client versus what would you do in this situation? And then corporate members started pulling together. They're like, hey guys, I'm not yet ready to hire the external, but here's my problem. What would you do if you were working with us? That kind of mindset shift is definitely very, very new. I'm sure you have something to share in that regard.
I think on this specific question, I'd say there's a lot of things changing. We know that's why we're changing. Things are changing quickly, but some things don't go out of fashion. And that's where I would answer in this. So the thing that's not going out of fashion is doing your best for your customers. That's always going to be there. Any companies that don't do that are not going to be around too long. And actually, when you think about it from what we do, consulting, our job is to do our best for our... Now, once you realise that despite your skills, your workforce strategy and all that, that doesn't mean you're always going to have all the time, all the right people to do the best for your customers. So you have to be a bit more humble, and you have to go and find sources of skills and talent that you don't necessarily own, but you have to work out to get that access to that talent, because that's how you do your best for your customer.
Absolutely. Same with trend watching, coming back to anticipating change. None of us can spot every trend economically. We can, it's just very expensive and very, very complex. But sharing a pool of resources to do a very good job at anticipating change, that's a slightly different opportunity, especially in one area. For example, Slovene automotive cluster. Each individual supplier of automotive parts is too small to have their own strategic planning with scenario planning and trend watching and foresight. But them pulling resources together into a cluster, they can foresight together much faster and then create open environment to see opportunities as a whole rather than competing with each other, which is what would be a normal industry practice, right?
Which I think is why what Rita said towards the end of her presentation is so important, that we need to have a simple statement of purpose, which aligns internally but also aligns externally. And if we are going to, and first of all, I would say it's not always the customer, it's not only the customer, it's also the employee, as you said, right? And it's also stakeholders, it's government, it's society, and then that ties to Patagonia. What our research shows is that successful companies today are more often working through ecosystems. They're more often more transparent about their strategy because, like John Deere, who's been enormously successful by creating this vision of precision agriculture and why that can be good for the farmer and for the environment. And then when you put that forward, then the other ecosystem players see themselves in your vision, right? And so I think that shifting to ecosystems, that's a key, but it also is good for society because it forces us to all kind of pursue a common goal.
We're just losing your sound, so I see the sound coming in. In the meantime, is there a last question? Yes, there's a question right here. Last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Hello, I'm Panos. First of all, thank you so much. Really insightful panel. Love all your inputs.
No, we didn't bore you yet.
No, no worries. I just have a quick question, more specifically for you, Kaihan. I'm speaking. There's two CEOs on the panel, one global data and AI consultant and everything. So all of you spoke how disruptive AI and this era that we live in is. So how do you strategize, and in what kind of time frames, since you know eventually your strategy will become obsolete with this kind of change that is happening? And more importantly, how can you be confident enough to create a business model or alter a business model knowing that eventually it will have to change?
I can give you a 30-second, because
Yes.
I've been looking at AI and related technologies, and I have a proposal for you. That snowmobile is this. In every industry, value will be created closer and closer to the moment and place that it is demanded. And you can put that vision, you have a customer has a need, and you don't make it until you know they have the need, and you make it right there. Yeah. And every step between now and then is an innovation opportunity.
Beautiful. So deep localization, decentralization.
I call it proximity to need, to demand. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'd like to have one little second on talent if I can, but just to answer. I struggle with this question actually, because I think if I asked the room which part of the world we thought was going to have greater growth and prosperity, I suspect many people would lean probably towards China and Southeast Asia and that part of the world. Probably. I recognize there are risks there as well. And if you look at the answer to that, their answer to that question is they have a strategy out to 2050, I think now, or 2048. And they have strong long-term strategic foundations with agile, tactical shifts to those long-term strategic foundations. And I think in the world of the planted foot and being sure about what you're doing, you need both, right? And so leaders need to have that Janus ability to look back and look forward. They need to be able to shift their heads, but I think it's fundamentally important that we don't lose sight of the fact that strategy is long-term. Yes, it may need to change. Your planted foot may be disrupted. You may need to think about it, but I don't think that constantly dancing around like some lab rat that doesn't know whether it's coming or going is the right way to be here, right? It's like there's a lot to be said for having the conviction. And you know, Charles Kahn's story from this morning is a long-term conviction of something, right? Like strategy is strategy. Like there's things that you can unplant, there's things you can disrupt. But I think, yeah, we got to take a leaf out of the long-term book here.
Love that. Change management, continuity management, the dance. Patrick.
I think there is. It's interesting because even, and I like your views actually, there, Simon. And I think Patagonia talked a lot about actually it's the passion and the mission they talked about, and that probably substitutes strategy. But strategy itself is changing. I mean, we saw some data today about, you know, the traditional strategists came from MBAs at Harvard, and we saw this thing, they can't get jobs anymore because to talk about strategy, because strategy itself is changing, so it goes into that pile. But I do like now it's the constant flux of an organisation, not the lab rats running around, but measured experimentation that you're always thinking. I really love the kill the company stuff today, actually. I think that's as good a strategy as I've seen for a long time as a strategy output. And maybe they should teach it at Harvard, and that's where you should go next.
Well, let me ask the last question. Just choose one. When you are dealing with reinvention on a regular basis, in-house, outsource, hybrid, give me one word.
Hybrid.
Hybrid.
Hybrid, but you need to do in-house in order to build a hybrid.
Here you have it. Thank you guys very much.